Well, welcome to the Alumni House. My name is Rich Coyne. I'm the general manager of this facility here. In a moment I will introduce Martin Sweeney, and who will help organize this evening along with David Quinlan. They are both alumni of SUNY Cortland. And as some of you may know, Mr. Sweeney recently published his work titled Lincoln's Gift from Home in New York, a painter, editor, and detective. Some little history on how this night came together. David had contacted me about 2 months ago to discuss the opportunity of hosting Mr. Burlingame. And after reviewing his laundry list of accomplishments, books, articles, personal appearances, whether it was television, radio, or public addresses, I felt that it would be a nice treat to everyone to host such a decorated Lincoln Scholar. Mr. Quinlan currently serves as a high school art teacher for Marathon. In 2009, he co-chaired an event titled Homer's Celebration of Lincoln in Paint and Print to mark the bicentennial of Lincoln's birth. And in addition, David has painted the Lincoln portrait that was located upstairs. You guys did not get the opportunity to look at it. Take a nice gather at that. The name of that is The First Reading of the Emancipation Proclamation Before the Cabinet. And David graciously has donated that piece to the Alumni House, which we will honor here at the house.
I also want to take this opportunity as an alum of this place, class of '68 and a master's in '72, before I went on to get an MPA at Syracuse University. I want to thank the institution for having given me a wonderful career. I would hate to think there's anybody out there who wakes up mornings and says, I don't want to go to work. There were some stressful days I had. You're going to have them in teaching. I had more than my fair share, but I never really didn't want to go in. Because once I closed the door, it was my world, and it was the world of history, which I had learned to love since I was age 4, I guess, when my parents took me to see the monument of the great emancipator, Lincoln.
An incredible Lincoln Scholar. He won the 2010 Lincoln Prize for his biography, A Life, and Abraham Lincoln, the biography, the definitive book. And we are just truly honored to have him to come to speak. And
Great things about being a Lincoln Scholar is that Lincoln had a great sense of humor. And when you do research about Lincoln, you're constantly running into funny stories that he himself told or that were told about him. And one day I was doing some research in the New York Public Library, in the main reading room, which is a beautiful facility, but it's always jammed. It's huge, but it's just jammed. There are people everywhere. So I was sitting at a big table. There were people across from me and on each side and behind me. The whole room was filled. And I was doing some work in reminiscences of Lincoln, written by people who had known him. And when you do research in such sources, you're bound to encounter funny stories. So there I am going through this material, and about a half hour into my work, I stumble across one of these funny stories. And without stopping to think where I was, I involuntarily burst out laughing. And everybody around me goes, shh, 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 shh. So, forgive me, I'm so sorry. So I returned to my work, and once again, about a half hour later, I find another funny story. And once again, without stopping to think where I was, I burst out laughing. And once again, a little more emphatically this time, everybody already goes, shh, shh, shh. I'm sorry, forgive me. So I go back to my work. Well, it happens a third time. At which point, the woman sitting across from me, very earnest woman about my age, taking notes diligently from a big sociology tome, and very earnest looking, no makeup, hair back in a tight bun, wire-rimmed glasses, and she leans across the desk and she fixes me with her gaze and she says, "Just what is your field anyhow? I think I'm going to switch to it." It calls to mind that scene in the movie When Harry Met Sally. You know, I'll have what she's having. Well, and one of the things that's well known about Lincoln's sense of humor is that he loved off-color stories. But when people were interviewed after Lincoln's death, about his sense of humor. And there's a lot of good interview material. His law partner, William Herndon, went out and interviewed or corresponded with over 200 people who had known Lincoln when he was a kid in Kentucky and an adolescent in Indiana and then an adult in Illinois, and later in Washington. And this is a great treasure trove of information. A lot of people talk about, in those interviews, about how Lincoln loved off-color humor, but the interviewees weren't going to tell any of those stories because they didn't want to besmirch the memory of the martyred president. Well, I was doing some research at the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana and the main campus there in the Carl Sandburg papers. And the Sandburg papers were huge, and I found a reference indicating that Sandburg had discovered these off-color stories. So I ransacked the collection. I found a lot of good material for my book, but I didn't find those stories. So I was a little disappointed. But then a couple of years later, I was at the Newberry Library in Chicago, in a tiny little Sandburg collection, and there the stories were. Now, Carl Sandburg was a man of taste, and so he didn't include any of these stories in his 6-volume biography of Lincoln. But I have no taste whatsoever. And so I've included them in this book. But they're not indexed, and they're not all clumped together in one spot. So you got to read the whole thing together. And I thought I'd share one with you. It's not too raw. Lincoln loved to tell a joke about an elderly gentleman in Illinois who was fascinated by the Revolutionary War era. This was in the 1840s. And he was told that a woman in a nearby village owned a dress that dated back to the period of the American Revolution. And so he goes over to that village and looks the woman up and asks her, is it true you have a dress dating back to the time of George Washington? And this old lady says, why, yes, I do. And the fellow gets all excited and says, well, do you think I could see that dress? She says, sure, why not? So she goes to her chest and digs and pulls out an old dress. And he gets really excited now. And he says, do you think I could hold that dress? She says, okay, sure. So he grabs a hold of the dress and he holds it up and he goes into a rapture. And he says, oh, miraculous garment, dating from the period of the American Revolution, when this old lady, in the first blush of her maidenhood, beheld you, she must have done to you what I'm about to do to you, namely kiss you. Mwah! And the old lady looks at him as though he's some kind of nut. And she scratches her head and she strokes her chin and she says, why, stranger, she says, I reckon if you want to kiss something antique, you ought to kiss my ass. It's 16 years older than that dress.